new friends who are here for the first time and joining the organization. Would you please stand up now so I can recognize you? Okay, right up here, let's start on the second row on the right.
You want me to introduce myself?
Yeah.
My name's John McKay. I'm here with J&J, and I just recently heard about this organization.
Through Jim or? Okay, well, thank you very much. And this gentleman and I go back a few years together, so we're going to have fun. Okay, three members right behind you.
I'm David Grego, an historian from Summit. I'm here from Bruce Chadwick, and we joined here tonight from my wife, Dr. Hall, and Hall, and our friend John Toll learned from us about this, so we go down to Connecticut.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. And over on the left.
Yeah, hi, my name is Paul Joyce. I'm here with my brother Walker and my friend and personal advisor, John Allen.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming, and we'll look forward to having you. Okay, there's many great events in October that I have to mention tonight. And first off, next Tuesday, the 19th, our friend Jeff McLaughlin, World War II book club lecture, he happens to have as his speaker the same man that we have tonight. Now, this is extraordinary. And Tom Fleming doesn't stop there. He'll be back on the 22nd of October for the Mount Vernon presentation, whether that's a Jockey Hollow. But 3 times in a week, Tom Fleming is going to make his great visits to New Jersey. So anyway, the 19th, though, McLaughlin has started this World War II group and has done so well, and he's just a terrific guy. Where is John? I just said, I would like to recognize him because he's so Now there's a young lady here who is enormously attractive named Carrie Fellows, who is the head of McCullough Hall, and they have a terrific evening coming up on the 24th. I know I'm going to be there where they're honoring Walker and Fred Kirby and Governor Kane, honoring them for their exploits over so many years to this state. Carrie, would you please stand so we can see who we are? Carrie Fellows. I have to mention our forthcoming meetings. On the 11th, we're going to have Bill Welch, who was quite emotional for me because back when we founded, this goes back to 2003, the Civil War Roundtable, the second speaker we had back in those days was Bill Welch, and somehow he drifted down and now lives in Richmond, where he founded and is now president of the Richmond, Virginia American Revolution Roundtable. And he'll be with us on the 11th. He's a great speaker talking about Washington's lieutenants. And after that, of course, on your seat, you get a good reminder here. This is our year-end gala, which is put on by the North Jersey Civil War Roundtable and the North Jersey American Revolution Roundtable, and this year we are honoring with a Lifetime Achievement Award former Governor Tom Kane, one of the great historians of New Jersey and great friends of history. It should be a terrific evening, and so please try to be with us at that time. Not to be outdone, on December 10th, we say goodbye to a dear friend who has meant so much to this particular roundtable and to history here right at Washington's headquarters. Randy Turner, after many, many years as superintendent here, standing in the left rear, waving hello. And we're going to have a reception for Randy from, I think, 3:30 to 6:30 or something like that. And it's worth going to because I have a hunch that his successor may also be there, and you'll have a chance to meet her. So at this point, I'm going to ask my partner, Rich Rosenthal, to come up. And going to talk about the North Jersey Civil War Roundtable, plus fill in wherever I forgot.
Carrie, just to start, before I forget, there was one thing that Carrie has a concert in the afternoon, 2:30, it's Spotlight on Youth at St. Peter's. That was the other thing that Carrie has. And it's Tartan Day on October 23rd, right? 24th. That's why I always put the date down, because I get the dates wrong. My group is used to me. For the Civil War Roundtable, this month we have Peter Luprecht, who's going to speak. He's a professor at Sussex County College, and he's also a theatrical consultant. The program is Lincoln Goes to the Theater. It's not the night that he gets killed, but he traces Lincoln's involvement and love of the theater, that he went once or twice a week, and then he also goes into some detail as to the plays that Lincoln watched, the Shakespeare, Addison's Cato, etc., and the quotations were derived. So it's a fascinating program. We hope you're there. The Civil War Garden is going to close at the end of the month, not because it gets cold, plants time. If you haven't been there, please be there, or at least make some calls there. It's medicinal plants of the Civil War. I understand we have several hundred calls that were made throughout the United States. I'll tell Tom Fleming was about, the director had said to me, Rich, you always hear about the arms and legs being cut out, but what about the medicines that were used? And she gave a PowerPoint presentation of digitalis, opium, all kinds of things like that. And we created and we funded a garden. So it's on display, probably the only one in the United States.
When the Lincoln Talk?
Pardon?
When is Lincoln Talk?
Next week.
In 2 weeks from tonight. We meet the second Thursday. The Civil War Roundtable meets the fourth Thursday, with the exception of Thanksgiving. She's not here, but she is they are a member of the Montville Historic Society, and Richard Schwartz is one of our members, and you remember him from Alexander Hamilton talk. He will be speaking November 8th, Why Lincoln Fought the Civil War, and that's at Montville on November 8th. The big thing reminder ahead of time is we pretty much have our authors set for April 16th for the Revolutionary War weekend. This is our first symposium. It's New Jersey, Washington, New Jersey, and the American Revolution. And John Cunningham will be our keynote speaker. I know we had new members that came in tonight. Would you introduce yourself, the new members who came in tonight?
I already did.
Oh, they did? What's that?
Did somebody named Mike Dowery not stand up?
Yeah.
I wasn't here for the first time tonight. I was here for the first time the last
No,
time.
we can't remember.
Oh, okay.
No, he wasn't here, Mike Dowery.
And Elizabeth.
Glad to see you, Mike.
Thank you.
Oh, there you go.
Mike, City Council for Jersey City, Thomas Fleming, Mayor Hay.
Thank you, Richard.
The name tags, remember, if you don't have them, you can pay. The other thing is, you'll make sure you have your names in that. The program is being recorded anonymously, but we have it online with Rich Del Braccio and Chris Hannafin going online. Anybody who really know how to work a website can use a little help on it. And what can I tell you? The dinner, one of the things, I know Harry mentioned the dinner, but this is important. Just as I did tonight, where I sent a notice out, I said, help me, are you really coming tonight? I honestly thought my email was spam. And the rain, I know in the traffic in 287 has held a lot of people back. But I had about 80 or 90 responses saying, I'm coming, I'm bringing somebody. So, and I was really concerned about the fire code through this. The dinner, this I know, we've already done preliminary talks and preliminary discussions. We are going to have a lot of people at the Basking Ridge Country Club. And the price is lower, it's $59, so it's well within reason, and you know we're not a fundraising organization. We anticipate pretty much a capacity to sell out a crowd. This is one year, I'll tell you, do not sit on your invitations, because we had a regular dinner. So please, they will be sent out. We're going to meet next week. The invitations will be sent out. If you don't have them, then take this thing with you. But it's that important that you do it. A lot of responses, and also a lot of people who are not members want to hear Governor Kane or be with Governor Kane on this momentous. So we've got to thank Harry for getting Governor Kane on this thing. So please, please, please get this in on time. Thank you.
Okay, Rich, and now this is a pleasurable moment before we get to our speaker. The man who was behind the formation of this roundtable is, of course, John Cunningham. And he means so much to us. And as a board, we voted the other day, and we want you, the members, to approve it tonight, to name John Cunningham as a lifetime honorary member of this roundtable. Would you rise and say hello to this great man over here? Okay, honorary member, you can sit down now, and now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. Along probably with John Cunningham, unquestionably New Jersey's most prolific writer. He has written books that have thrilled thousands of people on the Civil War, on the American Revolution, on World War II. You just can't think of a subject that there isn't a book by Tom Fleming, and we are thrilled that he has given us the opportunity to come tonight and speak to us on a very, very vital subject. Now We Are Enemies, the story of Bunker Hill. It's my thrill to introduce to you Tom Fleming.
Well, what a pleasure, what an honor to be here tonight to see one of my favorite historians on John Cunningham. We're all friends, but I haven't seen him in many years. And just to go over and shake his hand and start telling him, what are you working on now? You know, hey, we're still going, aren't we? You know, that sort of thing. It was just such a pleasure, and that redoubles the whole pleasure of having this chance to come and talk to you about this really amazing experience that I never. Uh-oh. Hang on.
Pocket pick.
The technology is failing us. Okay? I had to mention your name.
Shall we test it? Oh, that's better. I think we got it. As I was saying, to come and talk to you about this other unique experience as an old writer, I guess you might say, a guy who's had a lot of experience that I never thought I would have, and that is to have a 50th anniversary copy, or edition rather, of my first book, Now We Are Enemies, published. I didn't go looking for it. Last February, I got this call from this publisher down in Tennessee, who happens to have grown up in Westfield. The fact that he's one New Jersey guy having a favor done for him by another New Jersey guy, that couldn't have anything to do with it. But nonetheless, David Kane said, is anybody doing anything about this? This is going to be the 50th anniversary this June of your first book, Now We Are Enemies, which is one of my all-time favorites. And so I said, as far as I know, not particularly. And he said, I've got a publishing house, American History Press, and I would like to publish it. And that's why we're here tonight, to discuss this old battle and the new insights that I think I have gotten over the years while thinking about Bunker Hill, and also some of the insights I got while I was working on it back then. It's a chance to see how the American Revolution has come into the mainstream of the country's thinking. That's another aspect of the whole thing that I don't think many people realize. I realize it now, but having this 50th anniversary edition
has awakened me to that. And I have to say, New Jersey can't compete on this book. In one respect, I went up to Boston to publicize it on the anniversary of Bunker Hill last June, you know, and I've never seen anything like it. It's their battle. They loved it. I went to a meeting at the Park Service. The Park Service runs the museum of Bunker Hill up there, and they had this really great crowd. And some man stood up and he said, "Mr. Fleming, I thought you'd like to know that every person in this room has read the first edition of your book." And I said to myself, well, I said to him, "Oh, that's wonderful." But I said to myself, "Yeah, but I'm here to sell the 50th anniversary edition." Is that good news? But after the talk, we went upstairs. They have a lovely layout in this new building they have. And every one of these people bought 2 and 3 copies of the book to send to their children who had moved away from Charlestown. And we stayed there all day. They couldn't, you know, the people were saying, "We got to close this place down." They were talking about it so much. So it was great to see that the enthusiasm for that battle is still so alive in Boston. And I think I've seen it, you know, elsewhere too. I mean, only last night I was talking in a place that you wouldn't think anybody would be particularly interested in Bunker Hill. I spoke at the Rofon Club in Cleveland, Ohio. Why? Because they're an old club. They're well over 100 years old, and their specialty is books. They collect books, unusual books, books that have a story attached to them. And they heard about this 50th anniversary edition, and they paid quite a lot of money to fly me out there to Cleveland and hear the story that I'm going to tell you tonight too, for a lot less money. Anyway, let's start with a question. Daddy, who was that man, Joseph Warren? My 6-year-old daughter, Alice, asked me this question in 1958 when I came to Boston to do research on an article on the Battle of Bunker Hill. My wife, another Alice, had seen the assignment as a good opportunity to teach our 4 children some American history at the expense of the IRS. A statue of a handsome young doctor whose qualities of mind and heart might have made him America's first president stood in the small museum beside the Bunker Hill Monument. For me, the moment is memorable because I didn't know the answer to that question. I'd grown up in New Jersey, Jersey City to be specific, where 4th of July celebrations focus on our state's rich Revolutionary War history. As for those events in distant Boston, I was under the comfortable assumption that I knew all that. And that meant Paul Revere and Concord Bridge and firing at the whites of the British eyes of Bunker Hill. So, you know, when I got this offer, an assignment to write an article, I thought, I'm sure I'll go there and not talk about a day, or 2 days, you know. Well, what followed was the most exciting of my experience of my life up until that point. I soon discovered there had been no book on the Battle of Bunker Hill for 100 years. The Civil War and the 2 World Wars had overshadowed the Revolution story, reducing it to a mix of myth and glowing phrases in most Americans' minds. I discovered not only the magnetic, tragic story of Joseph Warren, whose death broke a dozen women's hearts, and a lot of men's hearts too, because he was so charismatic, but a host of other men, equally absorbing and equally forgotten by the Americans of 1960. At the center of the story lay a totally unknown British plan to launch a massive assault on the American army outside Boston on June 18th, 1775. 17th, as I'm sure you know, is the anniversary of Bunker Hill. American spies had discovered this cold-blooded intention to abort the revolution in its cradle, and this triggered the decision to build a fort on Bunker's Hill. I slowly realized there was a legend, or maybe we ought to call it a myth of Bunker Hill, which was very much alive in most Americans' minds, and the real story about which most Americans, including me, knew next to nothing. Early in my research, I had fun exploring the primary myth of Bunker Hill. I asked 100 people who had won the battle. All of them looked at me as if I was an ignoramus and said, "We did." When I told them we'd lost, they were stunned. Some of them regarded me with suspicion, as if I might be the agent of a foreign power. That's when I decided I was not only going to write an article about it, I was going to write a book. Even today, telling you this, I again feel my amazement and fascination when I discovered the words of the men who fought and bled and died at Bunker Hill, and the political and military intrigue surrounding their courage. The story burst through the stereotyped New Jersey ideas I had of these men as a group of raw amateurs whose sheer courage ended the British a stunning defeat. They stood before me as human beings with stories that told a very different lesson: the crucial importance of military know-how in the so-called American victory. My favorite, after Joseph Warren, was, and still is, roaring, swearing Israel Putnam of Connecticut, the General George Patton of his day. Here is a fellow soldier's description of old Put. He does not screw up his countenance into a form that belies the sentiments of his generous soul. He is not adept at politics or religious canting. He is no shake-hand body. He is totally unfit for everything but fighting. This description fits comfortably into the myth of Bunker Hill. The reality of Putnam's role in the battle is another matter. Israel Putnam was also fit, if I may play on the word, for some very realistic and shrewd military thinking. He had fought in dozens of battles and skirmishes in the French and Indian War as an officer in Rogers Rangers, the best-known American regiment in the conflict. He and several men, whose names you'll soon hear, were very close to being professional soldiers, in the tradition of the Roman general Cincinnatus, who went back to his farm after he won his wars. Putnam had watched with mounting anxiety as the 17,000-man army that was besieging the British in Boston. They were in a big semicircle on the land side of Boston. As these men grew bored and contentious in the 2 months since they had rushed from their farms after the battles of Lexington and Concord, he saw these soldiers needed action, preferably bold action, that testified to their officers' confidence in them. When Putnam heard about the British plan to attack the Americans on June 18th, he saw as a veteran soldier that the enemy would have an immediate advantage. They were seizing the initiative. They were exhibiting their confidence in the prowess and courage of their soldiers. Around their attacking battalions would also hover the reputation of the British Army as the best in the world, the soldiers who had won a world war against France and Spain in the previous decade. In a war, seizing and holding the initiative is a crucial factor in a victory. When the American army stopped the attacking Germans on the Marne River in 1918 and counterattacked a few days later from the forest around Soissons, they threw the Germans on the defensive for the first time. A member of their general staff later wrote, "In 3 days, the history of the world was changed forever." Germany had lost the initiative. Within 6 months, their generals asked for an armistice. Putnam convinced the Americans to build a fort on Bunker Hill on the night of June 16th to seize the initiative before the British attacked. He had to overcome massive doubts and hesitation among many of the officers in the American Army. They were led by a timid, lackluster Massachusetts officer named Artemus Ward. Old Put's argument was as blunt and direct as his style. He had seen Americans fighting in the French and Indian War. He knew what they liked and what they feared. Above all, they dreaded leg wounds, which often led to amputation in the 18th century. All they needed to give them courage was enough protection, he said, to cover their legs. Behind a barricade, they would fight, he swore, till doomsday. With his own Connecticut men, Putnam also utilized that mysterious quality known as leadership. A younger soldier, Captain Thomas Milton, told Colonel Putnam that building a fort on Bunker Hill was insane, and they would all be slaughtered. Old Putt looked at him and said, "I am going. Will you come?" Captain Milton said, "Yes, and every one of my men." When they marched out on Bunker Hill on the night of June 16th, Putnam made the shrewdest move. Bunker Hill was one of 3 modest hills on the Charlestown Peninsula across the Charles River from Boston. He suddenly insisted the fort had to be built on Breed's Hill, which was much closer to Boston. From there, American cannon could bombard the ships in the harbor and the city. From Bunker Hill, their light cannon would have fallen short. There was a good possibility that the British would just sack Boston and laughed at it, and then got ahead with their June 18th attack. But this, on June 16th, on that night, Putnam carried the day, but Bunker Hill remained the legendary name of the battle. Not long ago, I received a letter from a man named Breed. He claimed his family had owned Breed's Hill, in 1775. That was the whole point of his letter. He said he had spent he said they, the Breeds, had spent the intervening centuries trying to get the name of the battle changed. He told me he was now giving up, and henceforth he too would accept Bunker Hill as its name. I sent him my sympathy. Other leaders also won my admiration by actions as well as by words. I'm thinking in particular of Colonel William Prescott of Massachusetts, who deserves almost equal credit with Israel Putnam for pushing the argument to build the fort that triggered the British assault. Prescott quelled a potentially ruinous panic among his green troops in the half-completed fort when British ships in the harbor began to bombard them at dawn. A cannonball decapitated one of his men who was working outside the fort. The young soldiers stood there staring at this headless corpse, and Prescott shoved his way through them and looked down too. And they said, "Colonel, what should we do with him?" Prescott said, "Bury him." And then he jumped up on the parapet and walked up and down while British cannonballs hissed all around him. "It was a lucky shot," he shouted. "See how they keep missing me?" One of the privates in the fort, 20-year-old Peter Brown, never forgot this image of Prescott on that parapet. He later admitted the danger we were in made us think there was treachery, and we were brought here to be slain. At this point, nobody knew who was really a loyalist, who was a rebel. It was all up for grabs, and you can see why these men could easily be turned suspicious on something when something bad happened. Prescott's example on that parapet inspired Brown to stand his ground until the British poured over the walls of the fort an hour later. Only when he was ordered to retreat did he run a half mile, as he put it later in a little memoir he wrote, while balls flew like hailstones and cannon roared like thunder. Another important part of the real story of Bunker Hill are 3 black men, Peter Salem, Cuffy Whittemore, and Caesar Basson, in Prescott's regiment. In the legend that prevailed for 2 centuries, all the soldiers on both sides were of English descent. 3 other blacks, Caleb Howe, Titus Colburn, and Alexander Ames, were in another regiment, with some volunteers from a 3rd regiment who just decided to go, even though they weren't ordered to, was Salem Poor. All of them fought hard that day. 14 officers signed a report praising Peter Salem for his courage. Caesar Basson was badly wounded and captured. He died in a prison cell in Boston. Another semi-professional soldier is now on center stage. New Hampshire's Colonel John Starr. He's an even stronger refutation of the all-English legend. Starr and a hefty percentage of his men were Irish. Now, I know Stark doesn't sound like an Irish name. He was a Presbyterian. But in those days, the term Scotch-Irish had never been invented, believe me. It didn't exist. That's a mid-19th century term. And both the Presbyterian Irish and the Catholic Irish, and he had a lot of Catholic Irish in this regiment, all agreed on one thing. They hated the British. And the Presbyterian Irish had been in Ireland long enough to see how the British manipulated the economy and took every conceivable advantage to give British merchants and weavers and so on. It was just, they always had their foot in Ireland's neck. They didn't care what religion anybody was. And so here they were, marching out on Bunker Hill beside Colonel Stark. His parents were both born in Ireland. Other people, a fairly high percentage, almost 100 of these guys were also, the soldiers were actually born in Ireland. They were the recent immigrants. And there was a company from Bedford, under Captain John Moore, that was entirely Irish. There were numerous Irish in other American regiments, a total of more than 600. And there's a good story that goes with this. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, in around 1913 or so, he was a pontificator from way back. You know, he's a guy that helped St. Woodrow Wilson at the end of World War I. And so Lodge gave a speech in which he propounded the all-English on both sides theory. He fancied himself a historian, but he went out of his way to say, and moreover, there were no Irish. He knew this was going to really grate on a very large number of Irish who had settled in Boston, and this gave him a great deal of pleasure. Well, it just so happened that there was a guy named Paul Michael O'Brien who had arrived in Boston like maybe a year before, one jump ahead of the British Secret Service. And he took umbrage at this, and he decided he was going to do something about it. He was well educated, and he spent 3 years getting out muster lists and counting and sorting and so forth, and he's the one who found out, one by one counting, that there were more than 600 Irish, and not a single lodge. The Irish included no less than 9 Burkes, 7 Careys, and 11 Murphys. Now these are all Southern Irish names, so this gives you an idea too of the composition of Stark's regiment. I'm happy to report, incidentally, there were also 2 Flemings. An early historian of Bunker Hill added another important attribute of these New Hampshire men. Almost every one would rival William Tell as a marksman. John Stark, too, had been a captain in Rogers Rangers. He was famous for his coolness under fire, and he proceeded to display it when his regiment was ordered to go out onto Bunker Hill. This was rather late as the day was moving forward. They marched out onto the Charleston Peninsula through over a narrow neck, and there was a rain of cannon fire coming across his neck from the British ships in the harbor. And one of his captains, Dearborn, Henry Dearborn, later became a very famous man, a general in 1812 and a colonel in the Revolution. But at this point, it was his first battle, and he said to Colonel Stark, Colonel, do you think we could move a little faster? And Stark just looked at him and said, Dearborn, one fresh man in action is worth 10 fatigued men. See what I mean about military know-how? These guys were very close, as I said, to professional soldiers. Almost as impressive was Stark's second in command, huge 6'6" Major Andrew McClary, another Rogers veteran. They led the biggest regiment in the American Army, 800 men. And as I already said, they'd been ordered into the battle at the last moment. After Israel, Putnam had ridden to American headquarters at Cambridge and demanded reinforcements. He saw the huge number, or large number would be better, large number of men that the British were marching down to the Boston shore to send over there. And he realized that his little contingent that was out there, about 900 men, were going to be outnumbered. So he got Artemis Ford to finally break down and order Stark's regiment to go out. Stark is also the forgotten hero of the real story of Bunker Hill. When he reached Breed's Hill, he saw the guys in the fort who were really pretty exhausted by this time. And a thin line of Connecticut soldiers behind a rail fence at the base of Reed's Hill. A few people in the fort, well, Prescott probably, had seen that it was, you just couldn't win the battle if the consisted of 600 or 700 men in this fort. They had to defend their flanks, and particularly the flank that at the bottom of the hill that faced Boston, and the town of Charleston sort of protected the other flank. This was an inadequate number of men to deal with this rail fence and that whole flank down there. But Stark, he took one look at the situation with the eyes of a veteran soldier, and he ordered about 2/3 of his regiment to take position beside the Connecticut men behind the rail fence, so that pretty soon there was a solid line of almost 1,000 men down there along that rail fence, right down to the edge of the Mystic River, which was the river on the other side of the Charleston Peninsula. Then Stark saw the fatal American weakness. There was an undefended path up the Mystic River beach. Quickly, he ordered 200 of his best men to slide down the 8-foot-high bluff overlooking the beach and build a breastwork of stones from nearby fences. Stark went with them and took personal command. Another glimpse of how crucial he realized this beach was. And of course, it wasn't grasped by the other soldiers already out there, the Americans, because of these bluffs. You know, you didn't really see the beach from unless you got close enough to it. But Stark had walked around the battlefield and he saw it. And so there he was, a personal command. With almost uncanny intuition, Stark had grasped the British battle plan. The myth of Bunker Hill has the British attacking the entrenched Americans with arrogant overconfidence. In the real story of the battle, they hoped to avoid such a costly tactic. The British commander, General William Howe, planned to send a column of British light infantry charging up the Mystic Beach to attack the men in the fort and the rail fence from behind. Nothing would have panicked raw green soldiers like these men to see 500 or 600 British soldiers behind them with lowered bayonets, and meanwhile the guys on the other side were going to be ordered to charge, and it would have been a disaster. Nothing was more guaranteed if the British plan had worked. In fact, there was a very good chance they would have achieved a total rout, and they thought so. They planned to pursue the fleeing Americans, chase them right off the Charlestown Peninsula and over the neck, and attack them from the Charlestown side, just as they had been planning to do on June 18th. And they thought maybe they could put that whole plan in force. The rest of the British Army was going to attack up across Back Bay and hit the American center. And they might achieve the very thing they were hoping to do, which was to extinguish the whole revolution. But it didn't happen, because Stark's men were waiting for those British light infantry behind their stone breastwork. Blasts of musketry, fired with an accuracy no one in the British Army believed possible. I might add, the word aim was not in the British Manual of Arms. These blasts of musketry littered the beach with dead and dying attackers. Company after company lunged through the gunsmoke to suffer the same fate. The survivors fled, and agitated officers reported what had happened to General Howe. The dismayed general was forced to commit the rest of his men to a frontal assault on the fort and on the rail fence in 2 columns. There, at the rail fence, the Connecticut soldiers and the rest of Stark's regiment beat them back with the same deadly aim that had wrecked the attack on the beach. The Massachusetts men in the fort also dealt harshly with that other column that came at them. Watching the carnage as they reeled back again from the second attack, Howe said later that there was a moment I never felt before. This is a tremendously important statement in the history of the American Revolution. William Howe was one terrific soldier. He had played a crucial part in the capture of Quebec in 1759. He led a party of light infantry up this secret path in the middle of the night, smashed aside a French defensive outpost, and seized this path, which enabled General Wolfe to get his whole army up onto the plains of Abraham. And the next day, they won, and the battle, the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, was basically over. So here is an authentic American hero saying, this was a moment I never felt before. And in my future books on the Revolutionary War, that I didn't realize I would write when I was working on Now Your Enemies, I have seen those words echoing across other battlefields. Again and again, General Howe hesitated to make an all-out attack that might have destroyed a shaken American army. It's another reason why Bunker Hill deserves its mythic and its real importance. I was mesmerized by these men. I did enough research on many of them to write full-length biographies. I ferreted out letters they had written, diaries they had kept, anecdotes about them in other men's letters and diaries, and in speeches and contemporary newspaper stories. All these documents are interesting, but none approach the intensity of a letter that William Prescott wrote in the summer of 1774, a year before Bunker Hill, when Boston was just beginning to struggle to survive. The city had been occupied by a British army, and London had closed the port in retaliation for the Tea Party and revised the whole government of Massachusetts to make it less, shall we say, democratic, although they hated that word. And here's what Prescott wrote to his friends inside Boston. Be not dismayed or disheartened in this great day of trials. If we submit to these regulations, he meant the changes in the Massachusetts Charter, all is gone. Our forefathers passed the vast Atlantic, spent their blood and treasure that they might enjoy their liberties, both civil and religious, and transmit them to their posterity. Their children have waded through seas of difficulty to leave us free and happy in the enjoyment of our English privileges. Now, if we should give them up, can our children call us blessed? Is not a glorious death in defense of our liberties better than a short, infamous life, and our memory to be had in detestation to our latest posterity? This man was a writer as well as a fighter. Those words come close to summing up the reason for the entire American Revolution. It tells us in unmistakable terms that these men on Breed's Hill were defending a free way of life that they created in America during the previous 150 years. This is what makes the American Revolution unique among the world's revolutions. America was not only free, it was incredibly prosperous. Americans had the highest per capita incomes in the whole civilized world. And incidentally, they were also the lowest taxed. And they were determined to keep it that way. My next and most poignant discovery about Bunker Hill was how many of the American officers had friends on the other side of the battle line. At the height of the battle at the rail fence, Israel Putnam saw a half dozen of his men taking aim at red-coated Major William Small. Putnam struck up their muskets with his sword and shouted, "For God's sake, spare that man. I love him as a brother." They fought all through the French-Indian War side by side. Putnam could not protect another friend, Lieutenant Colonel James Abercrombie, but their friendship persisted in spite of a painful wound. As the Americans were retreating and British soldiers were carrying the bleeding Abercrombie to the beach, he gasped, "If you catch old Put, don't hang him. He's a good soldier." So unfortunately, Abercrombie died in Boston 7 days later. I realized Bunker Hill was much more tragic and complex than a fight between the good guys and the bad guys. That was the traditional, mythical way we viewed our revolutionary history.
Little more than a decade before, many of the British and American soldiers had fought side by side to win that world war against France and Spain. General Thomas Gage, the British commander-in-chief, had spent 18 years in America and counted George Washington among his friends. He was married to a New Jersey woman, Margaret Kendall from New Brunswick. William Howe, the British field commander at Bunker Hill, was a popular hero in New England for his exploits in the 1759 capture of Quebec. Boston erected a memorial to Howe's oldest brother, Lord George Howe, when he died in Israel Putnam's arms during a battle with the French near Fort Ticonderoga in northern New York. In England, another brother, Admiral Lord Richard Howe, had negotiated with Benjamin Franklin in a last-ditch attempt to rescue peace, only months before the guns began to fire. Joseph Warren's story reveals this hope for peace sought and lost in its most tragic dimensions. As president of the Massachusetts Provincial Congress, Dr. Warren was the key political figure on the American side in the crucial 60 days between Lexington Concord and Bunker Hill. John Adams, Sam Adams, and John Hancock were all in Philadelphia in the Continental Congress. A wrong move in Massachusetts, either too bold or too timid, might have wrecked the American political position. But Warren kept a perfect balance between a desire for peace and a refusal to knuckle under when the British resorted to brute force. To a friend in Britain, Warren wrote, "It's not too late to settle the dispute amicably. If there's any wisdom in the nation, God grant it may be speedily called forth. Every day, every hour widens the breach." Minutes before the battle began, Warren appeared in the Breeds Hill Fort to restore the sagging morale of the weary Americans who had built the fort and got no sleep the previous night. Earlier, Warren had ridden to nearby Roxbury to say goodbye to his 4 children, whose mother had died the year before. From his family farm, he could see the spires and roofs of British-occupied Boston, where a woman who was ready to become his second wife longed for him. Warren was under no necessity to risk his life at Bunker Hill. When several political leaders begged him not to go, he simply said, "The men need encouragement." So we finally see Joseph Warren, sword in hand, leading a last stand in the dust-choked Breeds Hill Fort, while around him a handful of fellow Americans, lifted up by his courage, dismiss their lack of ammunition and fight British bayonets with rocks and gun butts and fists until Warren falls with a British bullet in his brain. When Warren fell, liberty wept, is a saying attributed to several Americans, including Abigail Adams. Like many women, she was half in love with the handsome doctor. Her son, John Quincy Adams, all but worshipped him. And some students of that gentleman say that his intense hatred of the British, which pursued him throughout his political life in America, began when he heard about Warren being killed at Bunker Hill. I've written a play that focuses on Warren's story. I call it Death of a Hero. There are plans for a dramatic reading in Boston next December. In the drama, we encounter another character who belongs to the real story of Bunker Hill, but definitely not to the myth. His name is Benjamin Church. He was the first American traitor. While pretending to be a patriot, Church became one of the political leaders of Massachusetts. He was right there, just below Warren. In fact, he was a double agent, sending reams of information and advice to General Gage, using as a messenger a luscious prostitute who was his mistress. Are you shocked to discover these seemingly virtuous descendants of the Puritans had such temptations in their midst? I was when I read Church's story in 1958. But I rapidly grew older and wiser about such things. 18th century America was remarkably frank about sex, both in and out of marriage. Even while we mourn Joseph Warren's tragic fate, we know his sacrifice was not wasted. He has become part of a heritage we've been able to call on again and again to cope with other crises. To regain that heritage, was the main reason I wrote Now We Are Enemies. In 1960, Americans were going through a difficult period of self-doubt and uncertainty. The Korean War had ended in a stalemate that considerably deflated the euphoria of our victory in World War II. Then came the stunning demonstration of Soviet Russia's prowess in outer space, climaxed by Sputnik's electrifying circuit of the globe. Many Americans began to wonder if the nation was going to finish a lame second in the struggle for world leadership. The parallel to American feelings on the eve of Bunker Hill was remarkable and still is. A great many Americans then did not think their soldiers could stand up to the British Army in a face-to-face encounter. The performance of the men who fought at Bunker Hill changed tens of thousands of lives and made independence much more than a wistful dream. The Americans were forced to retreat, largely because they ran out of ammunition, a blunder best explained by the makeshift organization of their army at this point in the war. They were acutely embarrassed by this defeat until their spies in Boston reported the stunning British casualties. Almost 50% of the attacking force had been killed and wounded. Pretty soon, a Rhode Island general named Nathaniel Greene was remarking, "I hope we can sell them another hill at the same price." That was the beginning of Bunker Hill's transformation from defeat to mythical victory. 4 days before this 50th anniversary was published, 50th anniversary edition was published, I picked up a copy of a local New York paper that most high-minded citizens of Gotham will never admit they read. I'm talking about the New York Post. The editors worked hard at living up to that déclassé brand name tabloid. But that doesn't mean they can't get some things right. On the front page, this day, when I picked it up, it was June 13th, was a headline that made my historian's heart leap. It was proof that there was some point in writing history books after all. Here it is. It says, USA wins 1-1. It celebrates the American soccer team's improbable tie against a supposedly superior British team. And then the subhead is, here's the punchline, the greatest tie against the British since Bunker Hill. Did that guy in the newsroom, did he read Now We Are Enemies? Somehow, somewhere, he got the story straight. Thanks so much.
Before Tom takes some questions, I do want to mention again that is the book on Now We Are Enemies, the story of Bunker Hill, is for sale in the bookstore in the back. If any of you are interested, and he will be here to sign any copies that you wish. Okay, beyond that, I'm sure, does anybody have a question that they'd like, starting in this left rear?
You mentioned Abigail Adams a moment ago. Is it true that she walked up to the top of a hill across the river with John Quincy to watch the battle in real time?
No.
That's not true.
It was just, I don't know where that story comes from, but I never came across any verification of it. She was, the story as I have it, was she was on the road, out on the road, and a messenger came riding by and said, "Oh, you had to retreat." They told she and John Quincy the story of the battle. And then he said, "A lot of men were killed," and so forth. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And he said, "And I'm sorry to say, Dr. Warren was killed." And that was when John Quincy Adams just looked at his mother and said, he was 10 years old. Could anyone hurt Dr. Warren? You know? And that's the more authentic story. But, you know,
there's lots of stories of small incidents like that. That are not all, you can't track them all down. But at any rate, she was definitely interested in the outcome, partly because she didn't know Warren was in the battle. She was pretty far away out there at Braintree. But at any rate, yes, sir.
There is a story that Warren's body was found by British troops and mutilated after that. Is that true?
I'm sorry, I'm not getting that.
There is a story that Warren's body, when it was found by British troops, was mutilated.
No, that's not true. He was buried. His body was stripped of its very handsome clothes. He wore a beautiful silk shirt and a flowery hat. He wore some of his most expensive clothes. He was a very successful doctor. He wore that out there to convince these men that he was there to stay. He wasn't out there just to, pat them on the back and then depart. He thought that he was saying, I'm here and I'm dressed in my best and we're going to win this battle. That was his whole point, you know. And so I don't think that his body was mutilated. They buried all of the people that were left on the battlefield. You know, and by that time, as I say, they did strip off his clothes. The British troops were, pulling looters.
Okay, any other questions? Okay,
Where
we are.
Of the people in the battle, how many Americans actually survived?
American casualties are about 250, and there was almost 2,000 Americans in the battle. So it was our losses were light compared to the British. No, I think actually, you mentioned it. I think it was 450. We had 450 dead and killed and wounded. So we lost a fair amount of men. Almost all of them were killed or wounded in the retreat. It was a pretty wild scene. People were running for their lives. The British were naturally infuriated with all these casualties they'd taken, and they were out to kill as many Americans as they could. So that's where we suffered most of the casualties.
How many British casualties were there?
1,050. Almost half the attacking force. Yes, sir.
How long did it take for the news to spread to the colonies after that?
How what?
How long did it take for the news of the battle to spread to the colonies?
Oh, well, now that's a very interesting and very important question. And you can't put everything in a speech. But this is very important. Benjamin Franklin, the title of my book is from a letter that Benjamin Franklin wrote to a very close friend of his who was in the British Parliament. And Franklin had spent the previous almost 20 years in London trying to keep this thing from exploding into a war. And so he wrote this letter to his friend as saying, and another thing I omitted in the talk, as I say, you can't put in everything, was in the course of the battle, towards the latter part of the battle, the Americans were sniping at the British column that was attacking the fort from the houses. They were sniping from the houses in Charlestown. There was about 600 houses in Charleston. That town was called the Mother of the Colony. That's where they first settled. And a lot of people, when the British occupied Boston, sent their furniture and personal papers over and put it in the cellars of houses in Charlestown. But when the snipers started firing on them, the British commander, General Piggott, who was commanding that column, he sent word out to the British ships in the harbor, and they fired hot shot into Charlestown, and they burned the place to the ground. It was really a huge conflagration, and a lot of people in Boston were like, oh no, there goes everything I own, almost everything I own. Anyway, Franklin wrote in his letter to his friend in Parliament, you have begun to burn our towns and murder our people. You were once my friend. I am now your enemy, Ben Franklin. And that letter, it looks, wow, you should imagine that guy in Parliament must have reeled when he got it. He never saw it. Franklin didn't mail it. Instead, he sent it to every newspaper in the country. And that had more to do with turning Bunker Hill into a revolutionary conflagration than almost anything else. In northern New York, for instance, I've been doing research on a book about the Loyalists, and there was a very large number of Loyalists around Sir William Johnson's
operation in northern New York. And when Franklin's letter was published in the Albany newspaper, whoa, a huge civil war exploded up there between the rebels and the loyalists. And it was triggered by that letter. And so that's how they passed the word. Thanks for Ben. Yes, sir.
If you were writing Now We're Enemies Today, how different the book would have been?
Good question. I think a friend of mine is writing a book. It's 3 main battles, and one of them is Bunker Hill. And he sent me his portion of the Bunker Hill battle. And he's a very good writer. Alexander Rose, his name is. He wrote a good book on spies in the Revolution. And he's a young British American. He lives in this country, but he educated in Oxford. And his book is much more analytic. He repeatedly stops the battle and tells you the history of this particular regiment and so forth and so forth. Whereas my book, my whole idea, my inspiration was Bruce Catton. I was translating his idea of a dramatic narrative to the American Revolution. And this was the first time that the American Revolution had a narrative, non-fiction narrative. Kenneth Robbins had written, some novels about the Revolution. But this was the first time that a narrative drive, a really strong narrative of the American Revolution reached a large number of people. It was, the book was a main selection of the Literary Guild. It was reviewed in 62 newspapers. It had the front page of the Chicago Tribune. And then the topper was, it was picked up and condensed by the Reader's Digest, which meant 18 million readers. So this, I may be bragging a little too much, but this book had a lot to do with thrusting the revolution into the American consciousness. sat silent at his desk for a half hour after he heard this news. He was paralyzed. So, you know, yeah, but Bunker Hill became a formula for winning the war with a lot of generals. But it wasn't, you know, Washington had to do a lot of rethinking. When they were defending New York, they built a huge fort down in Lower Manhattan. And guess what? They called it Bunker Hill. But what did the British do? They outflanked it. They landed in Kips Bay, and the guys at Bunker Hill had to run for their lives. You know, so I call it Bunker Hillism. That became a strategy for a while. And there's an anecdote, again, you can't really prove it, but it's a good story. They said that General Putnam as Washington was retreating across New Jersey, General Putnam was found in a tavern in Newark, drunk. And they said, "What's wrong, General? What's up? What's red?" And he said, "Oh, the war is over. It's all over. We can't win now. We're retreating across New Jersey, and there are no hills in this state." And none that he could see from Newark. No, anyway, I think
everybody, one more time. Well, now you know why Tom Fleming is so highly sought after around the country. And Tom, I can't tell you how much we appreciate
Well,
your
thank you.
being
It's really been a pleasure. I mean,
And now,
my native state, you know?
and now, as all the rest of you know, we have this wonderful closing phase of the program. Dick Forsham, by all means, sit down and relax. You may be able to answer a question here. Dick Forsheimer on our Q&A. See how good you folks are tonight. This is Dick Forsham.
I'm gonna make this pay for everybody tonight. If you get a right answer, you get a Snickers bar. The kids that come around to our house on Halloween are gonna be the poor for this. I think we can do it. All right, I'm gonna list 3 battles, dates and places, and you tell me whether the Patriots or the Brits prevailed in the battle. First one is 26 December 1776. The battle was Trenton. Who won?
The Americans.
The Americans. Okay. Here's another one. This is a little more obscure. 17 January 1781. Hannah's Cowpen, South Carolina. Americans. Big defeat of Taunton. The last is 28 October 1776, White Plains. The British won that one. Okay. Distributed this candy numbers. One for you.
I got tricked.
Here's one for you. How many Bostonians were killed and wounded in the Boston Massacre of 5 March 1770?
5.
No?
3?
7. No? 9. So I get the win. Of the 9, 2 died immediately and 7 fell wounded, of which 2 more died later of wounds. We know precious little about this, about the Boston Massacre. It's one of the turning points of our history. So here's another question. What was the name of the freed black colonist killed in the Boston Massacre?
Crispus Attucks.
Crispus Attucks. Very good. Okay. Who did that? Who said that?
We did.
What was the name of the only Boston lawyer who agreed to defend the British? John Adams, another piece of candy. All of the British enlisted men involved in the Boston Massacre were acquitted, except 2 who were convicted of manslaughter. What was their punishment? Branding. Oh boy, you're going to eat all the candy.
I don't need to eat anymore.
Both of these soldiers were branded on their right thumbs with the letter M for manslaughter. Okay, and they were allowed after that to return to their regiment to duty. What was the name of the British merchant ship that was boarded on 16 December 1773 in Boston Harbor by colonists thinly disguised as Mohawk Indians, the so-called Boston Tea Party? What was the name of the ship? No, close. No? No, I don't mean the animal. No, the ship, there was a ship called the Beaver in the harbor at the time.
Is it the letter?
The Dartmouth. The Dartmouth. Okay. These are kind of obscure, but it'll pique your curiosity, I hope to. Okay. The colony's first organized response to British tyranny was the First Continental Congress. Where and when did it first convene?
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia is correct.
1774.
1775.
Right? Any closer?
Carpenter's Hall.
Carpenter's Hall. The date?
Really?
The date?
1774.
5 September 1774. Well, everybody then recognized that there was a threat by the British. On 18 April 1775, 2 patriots rode out of Boston and warned residents of Lexington and Concord that a large force of British troops were en route. One was Paul Revere, who was shortly apprehended by loyalists. Who was the second?
William Dawes.
William Dawes. What was his occupation? No? He was a shoemaker. Incidentally, Revere was glorified by Longfellow's famous poem because I guess his name rhymed a little bit better than Dawes. Some 6 years after the war's end, on September 28, 1787, the Congress of the Confederation voted on a very important issue. Can you name it?
Constitution.
What the Constitution?
The Constitution.
It was sent out.
For ratification.
Right, for ratification. Very good. Can I reach a piece of candy? We're going to get a feeling award, too. Just a couple more. Well, just one, as a matter of fact. On 27 September 1779, 2 years before the surrender in Yorktown, Congress appointed one of their number to negotiate peace terms with the British when hostilities ceased. Who was that man?
John Jay.
Who?
John Jay.
No.
Lawrence.
No. Warren was dead.
Lawrence.
Henry.
I said Henry Lawrence.
No.
Adams.
John Adams. Okay. Well, I'm taking a lot of candy home. Very good. You did very well. Thank you. So let's go. I entreat you to please turn in your name tags, okay? People who were here tonight and did not get name tags, rest assured that we will have them for you by the next meeting.